this one is a lot about rules. These are the laws and the obligations that you need to follow. And here's where we get into what a demerit point is and what demerits, what do they mean for you? So the first thing on driving within the law is fatigue. One of the major things, and one of the major things that you can avoid as a driver is when you get tired, making sure you're making proper choices to get behind the wheel. So fatigue or tiredness, it's just another word for being tired. Being fatigued, but is more than just sleepy. So fatigue can happen, not Red Bull can help, but I'm going to talk a little bit about stimulants and caffeine and things like that as well. So fatigue just doesn't mean nighttime. You can actually be fatigued at any time. And we're going to go over the things that cause fatigue. Fatigue means that there's weariness of your mind or your body or both. So when driving, fatigue can be deadly because you have less attention or less ability to make quick decisions when you're fatigued. So fatigue can actually be caused by a lot of different things. Not one thing we mainly think of is lack of sleep or lack of rest. You didn't sleep that much, or you didn't sleep well, you were up all night. That's one cause of fatigue. However, there's also things like emotional stress. Like this girl, she just got in an argument with her boyfriend. He broke up with her and she's like crying. Like that can cause a lot of fatigue, like emotional stress. You guys have probably felt it when you feel stressed. You just feel drained. You have like no energy and you don't feel, I know people that can get emotional and they've said like, I can't drive right now. Nicole, can you give me a ride? Because they're not intoxicated or anything. They're just under so much stress. Their brain cannot handle the ability to focus on the road properly because they got so much other stuff going on. So even like, yeah, Paul said, or Charmaine said like the afternoon wall after lunch. Exactly. Like sometimes you're just drained because you were in meetings all day or you had a really hard day at work and you're tired. That's fatigue as well. Boredom. Just being bored, you can start feeling tired, especially when you're driving long distances. For driving long periods of time can make you tired. You've just been on, especially in Saskatchewan, right? You're just like straight road the whole way. There's been no turning, no stopping, nothing to look at. That can actually cause your brain to start getting that fuzziness feeling, that mental drain. Physical activity, like say you just ran a 2.5 marathon or something, or you just did boot camp or something, and you're just physically drained. Or like I said, a hard day, you just worked a 12-hour shift at work doing some hard labor, some construction, concrete, something like that, and then you need to get behind a wheel. Those are things you need to understand, that you could potentially not be acting safely if you're drained or feeling tired. Even sickness, you guys have all probably felt like when you're sick, you have a cold or something and you can feel it. You're just, oh, I don't feel like getting behind a wheel right now because I'm sick. Eye strain, that was the other one too. And I talked about that when we're nighttime driving. Remember I said your pupils constantly have to dilate and undilate to adjust to all these different things of light, dark, headlights, all that light coming into your eyes back and forth, and you having to concentrate. That can cause fatigue. So that's why night driving is very challenging. There's multiple factors that are going into it. Also at nighttime, naturally, when without sun, our body's not getting we're not getting the proper nutrients, and when we see the sun, we naturally start to wake up. But at nighttime, our bodies, it's like we get this natural signal that, hey, it's time to go to bed. So even at nighttime, when you may not feel tired, you're like, oh, I feel good, but your body could be telling you, hey, it's time to sleep. So that could be kicking in as well. Yeah, your circadian cycle. Also, if you're used to it, like if you're used to going to bed at 10 every night and now you're pushing it till 11 or 12 o'clock, your body's like, let's go to bed. And if you just keep pushing it, you're like, oh, we're almost home. Just be mindful. You can be putting yourself at a dangerous situation when you're tired. And monitor how you're feeling as you drive. Also, pull over, take a little bit of a break. Or maybe pull over when it's safe at a roadside turnout or a gas station and get out of your car. Like, get a fresh air, get some oxygen into your brain. And sometimes that can wake you up too. Even when you're driving, they say nighttime driving, you can even turn on the music and stuff, but even opening up the window a little bit, that can help kind of perk you up and alert you. Other things, the suggestions here were like Red Bull and coffee. Those can wake you up for a little bit. That little bit of caffeine shot can stimulate you. But then, like Charmaine said, you get that afternoon wall or like a crash. You can even get a little bit of a crash after caffeine. And now you're feeling even more tired than when you started. So there's a lot of other things that can contribute to you not being a safe driver, like impaired driving. And impaired driving, that's the term you're going to see in your book and in the exam. Impaired driving does not just mean drinking and driving. That's one form of impaired driving, but impaired driving can also mean things like prescription drugs, cannabis, or a mixture of all those things. Drugs, alcohol, tiredness, mental strain, all of that can make you impaired. And so when you're impaired, that means that you don't have a full ability to drive properly, and you don't have enough mental clarity and ability to make good judgments. So remember, I talked about the biggest thing for driver error and the biggest cause of collision is poor judgment. And when you're impaired or under the influence, you tend to have poor judgment. And that applies to when you're in the bar trying to hit on a girl, you maybe express that poor judgment you're making, or you try to do a backflip or a keg flip at the party, right? Like, we release our inhibitions and we start to do crazy things. Same thing applies when you get behind a vehicle. Sometimes we try to do crazy things, or we don't make the best decisions when we're under the influence. So even though cannabis is legal, and it's legal here in Canada for recreational purposes, you could still be impaired. Would anxiety or PTSD be considered impaired? It could, if it's to the point that it is stopping you from driving. So I know I've had anxiety before, where my mind is so focused on my own worry and what's going on, especially during COVID, right? Through all of this uncertainty lately, a lot of people have been having anxiety and fears and stress. And so when I was feeling that, I went and laid down in bed. Like, there's no way I would have got behind a wheel, because I know that I'm not making good judgments. Even when I'm feeling really overwhelmed, like say I'm feeling really overworked at work and my daughter, and like I just had a really bad day and I get behind a wheel and I'm feeling emotional, like I need to cry. I won't start driving, because when I'm emotional, I make bad decisions too. Or if I'm angry, I tend to speed, or I tend to get road rage. So I try to avoid myself getting into situations like that behind the wheel, because then you're not making the best decisions. Oh, so Charmaine, you were in some accidents before and you get anxiety behind the wheel. I've heard that too. I know that there's people out there that have been in accidents before, and they get that sort of PTSD, or that flashback, and they instantly, their anxiety starts getting raised with as soon as they get in a vehicle. That is definitely a common thing for people who have been in major accidents before. So I don't have a solution for that. What you have to do is monitor yourself, right? If you don't feel good behind the wheel, just pull over, or get somebody to drive for you, right? Like, call a friend and get them and say, like, I can't drive my vehicle right now. Can you come and get me? Call a cab, something like that. It is okay to feel like that. It's normal. And it's up to you to monitor how you're feeling. And that's the biggest thing when it comes to the drug use and alcohol use, right? Alcohol and cannabis are legal. However, that doesn't mean it's legal to get behind a wheel. So not all medications can affect people in the same way, but you need to be mindful of what medication you are taking. Sometimes some medications can cause drowsiness, and sometimes it'll have a warning on the label that says do not operate heavy equipment, or do not operate a vehicle. You need to take those seriously and understand that. Even some like cough medicine can actually make you feel drowsy or tired or woozy. Like, you don't want to be in those situations and getting behind the wheel, because you could get into collision. Or you could be found, you could get pulled over and get get a ticket because you're swerving or you blew past the stop sign, something like that. So be particularly cautious when you take new medicine. Always don't plan to drive when you're starting a new dose of medication. Even when you get put under from the dentist, sometimes like when I got my wisdom teeth taken out, I was put under and they said it takes a while for that medication to wear off, or that sleeping agent, right? So even with that, they wouldn't even let me drive myself home afterwards. I had to get someone to come get me. So those are all, use caution. Here's like a warning. Some medications or cough, even over-the-counter medications, can cause sleepiness, blurred vision, dizziness, slow movement, fainting, unattentiveness, excitability, nausea. Anytime you're feeling symptoms like that, don't get behind the wheel. The worst thing is if you're feeling sick and you got to start puking while you're on the highway. That is not a situation you want to be in, right? So comes to drugs. Drugs or alcohol can impair your driving. We do know this. We all are pretty good. We've seen the mad driving, Mothers Against Drunk Driving campaigns. When you're driving, you need to be alert, and you never want to mix drugs and alcohol. So even in our book, here's a whole mixture of drugs. Someone's having a wild weekend right now with their wine and our cognac and some pills and some needles. I don't know. But even in our book, it talks about cannabis in there. So there are legal limits to alcohol, like 0.05 is the legal limit. However, if you are drinking and you're having cannabis, even smoking a joint or even eating edibles, those all contribute and combined can make you impaired. So even if you had one drink and one puff off a joint, and then you want to drive home in an hour, you could still be over the legal limit because you're combining both the alcohol and the cannabis together. So we talk about that on page, I'm going to go find it, in chapter 9. It talks about those legal limits of cannabis use. And it talks about it on page 112 that there is a blood drug concentration, BDC, blood drug concentration of 5 nanograms or more of THC per milliliter of blood. So that's not very much cannabis at all. Yeah, they say 4 hours after, but it all depends. There isn't a general rule like law in your book. So if you smoked a joint and then you waited 6 hours and then you go home, you could still be under the influence. You can't just depend on that timeline. It all depends on how heavy you are, how big you are, how small you are, what you ate that day, and how experienced you are. Are you a common user of cannabis, like a normal stoner kind of thing? Or was this like first time you've done it in a while and so it hits you harder? It also depends on what type of concentration your marijuana is at. And if you had a joint and you had some edibles and some brownies, all those things can actually combine. So it's really hard for you to make a judgment call by saying, oh, I'm just going to wait 4 hours. That could or could not be the situation. You could feel fine by then, or you could still feel impaired, or you could still be legal. Even if you feel good to drive, you could still be over the legal limit. So lots of drugs can affect your driving ability. Alcohol, sedatives, tranquilizers, antidepressants, even sleeping pills, narcotics. Alcohol. So drinking and driving continues to be a major cause of traffic deaths and injuries in Alberta. It's actually still a big, even with all those campaigns, even while we know we don't ever intend to drink and drive. It's never something where you're like, what are you doing later tonight? I'm going to go drink and drive. It's not something that we tolerate or accept. It's just something that still actually happens. There's still lots of people that get caught drinking and driving. And the reason why people are still doing it, I think it's because we tell ourselves these things. Because alcohol is common and it's a very social thing that we're doing with friends and family as adults, we often think that we're going to be okay, or we drive to a friend's house, or we drive to the bar, and then we're like, oh, I'm not going to drink, or oh, I'm just going to have one, that's fine. But sometimes, anybody who does drink, you know that sometimes it's not just one. You always tell yourself, I'm just going to have one. Most people don't just have one. Like, you have one, then you feel good, oh, okay, I'll just have one more, and then all of a sudden you've drank over your limit and you're not okay to drive home. But as you can see here in the image, this is a picture of people that have been found drinking and driving, and these are the kind of excuses or the things that we tell ourselves. We talk about, oh, this video, I'm okay to drive. Like, I'm good. I feel good. And when you're drinking, you have your inhibitions go down and you have this false sense of confidence when you're drinking. So that applies to not only hitting on that girl at the bar, but it also applies to when you get behind the wheel. You're like, I feel good. I can drive. I can drift. Like, you feel like Vin Diesel and Fast and Furious. Like, watch me. I can do this. That's not the case. If you get found doing that, even if you think you're okay to drive, you could still get pulled over. Even if you didn't hit somebody or anything, that cop watched you walk out of the bar and get in your car, and then he pulls you over, and then you're getting charged with a DUI. So even if you think you're okay, don't do it, because you could find yourself in a situation where you're losing your license, or you're getting through a suspension and you're dealing with a whole other headache. So some other examples that people, or these excuses that we tell ourselves, is like, nobody's driving my truck. Like, I'm not leaving my truck at the bar. I'm so not waiting for a cab. Like, that's so expensive when I have my car here. I'm only driving a few blocks. Like, don't worry, I'll be fine. I can hold my liquor, or I'll take the back roads. That's when you always hear, especially on the res, right? Like, I know the back roads. Don't worry, bro. I got the back roads. We got this. No, that is not something we need to do, because it's putting not only you at risk, but it's putting your passengers at risk. It's putting other road users at risk. And unfortunately, sometimes people that are making good choices get caught in bad situations. A couple weeks ago, my friend's uncle, he died in a car accident because he got hit by a drunk driver. He was just driving home and a drunk driver hit him. He wasn't doing anything wrong, but because somebody chose to get behind the wheel and drive, the drunk driver survived, but he's the one that passed away, and he left a beautiful wife and kids. So that's really unfortunate. That's not something you ever want to do. We often think when we're drinking and driving that it's only us, or it's our responsibility. Oh, it's my fault if I get caught. But it's not. You're putting other people at risk as well. So be mindful of that. Zero alcohol tolerance for new drivers. I did talk about this before, but I'm reiterating it for GDL drivers. There is zero alcohol level. So while you're on that GDL, that driver's license program, you cannot consume any amount of alcohol or any amount of cannabis. If you're caught driving while under the influence of any trace, even just trace amounts of it, you can be facing a fine or a vehicle seizure, and demerits. So, and that GDL program, it doesn't mean that you hold your license for 2 years and then boom, all of a sudden you get your full class 5. No, you actually have to pass another advanced road test. You got to pay more fees, and you got to get off the GDL program. You have to prove that you are experienced enough to get off the graduated driver's license program. So just because you've had your license for 2 full years doesn't mean you automatically graduate off the program. You actually have to stay on that program until you can pass a road test. So people can be on the GDL program for years. There's no incentive for them to move on, or it's fine, they have their license. However, anybody with that GDL still has to have zero alcohol content level. Violators will have their license suspended automatically for at least 1 month under that zero alcohol tolerance, and they can seize your vehicle. And anybody who violates that condition a second time, if you're found doing it again, you will get suspended, and you'll have to appear in front of the Transportation Safety Board in order to get your license back. So there's a whole lot of headache. Like, here in Alberta, if you're drinking and driving is such a serious offense that there's so many hoops you got to jump through. You have to go appear in court. You have to pay a lawyer, you got to pay really high fees. I think the minimum for driving under the influence, the minimum fine if you're found over that limit is $1,000 and up from there. And it can increase your insurance rates, like all kinds of stuff. Driving while your license is suspended. So here's another situation. So say you did get your license suspended because of you were caught drinking and driving, and then you choose to drive without, well, that license is suspended, and you get caught, 2 weeks later. You're not under the influence though, but you're driving without a license, without a valid license. You may go to jail and you can pay a large fine, and then your license can get suspended even further, another 6 months on top of your already suspended license.
Hey, Nicole.
Yeah.
So this one time when I was about 19 or 20, can't remember, but it was about 15 years ago, I'd gotten suspended for demerits.
Yep. Too many infractions.
A 30-day suspension. And I didn't know because I didn't check my mail.
Oh, you didn't know you were suspended.
So I got the cops pulled me over and I showed him my license as usual, and he says, "You're suspended." I'm like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, you're suspended." And I didn't believe it, right? They towed my vehicle. And when I checked mail, of course, it was in there. So he was right. I was suspended because I got too many demerits, right? So they towed my vehicle. I had a court appearance. I lost my license for 10 months total. 6 months mandatory, driving while suspended.
Yeah.
And then I had to wait for an appointment with Alberta
Transportation Board.
So I had to wait 4 months for that.
Oh.
So 10 months. I got a fine, and they impounded my vehicle for 30 days. That was around $1,100.
Yeah, those are like if your car ever gets impounded for infractions or for illegally parking somewhere, it's like $50 a day. So you can imagine after a month, you're paying well over $1,000 just to get your car back, plus all the fines, plus your reinstatement fees, plus all the time you miss from work or whatever.
Long story short, I got 10 months without a license, huge fines, and 15 years later, I'm finally off. Like all the negative effects from that day are off this year. April of this year. I couldn't do that class 5 exam.
Yeah.
Because of that. And I'm finally able. I had to wait like 10 years to get a clean abstract or something like that. So it followed me along. Followed me that long for over 15 years.
Seems like government entrapment. Yeah, it is. The government, like seriously, there's so many regulations around licensing and making sure your registration's up to date. That's a fine. Making sure your insurance is up to date. That's a huge fine. Driving without insurance, what is it, $2,500 minimum?
I got one of those too when I was younger. I got $3,800 altogether.
Yeah.
I got one of those too. When I was younger, I bought a vehicle. I couldn't wait for the insurance office the next day. I was too excited to go home. I went home. I hit a check stop. They nailed me for $3,800, no insurance.
It's because you were brown.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It is. We actually do get pulled over. Like, actually, one of my friends, she's like totally legit, has her license. She's a great driver too. When I drive her with her, I call her a granny because she's always just being very cautious, but she's a good driver. She's never been in accidents. She's always up to date. And she was driving, and we were coming from like Paul Band, I think we were coming from, and there was a truck full of us natives in there, and we got pulled over. Like, why did he pull us over? And the cop had no real excuse, because usually when they pull you over, there's got to be a reason, like a tail light's out, or your registration isn't renewed, like something's got to be done. And he was like, you know what he told her? He said, "You looked like you were scared, so I pulled over, and he wanted to check everybody." Like, that's kind of bogus. So it's true, we we do get pulled over a lot more. for cops. So just make sure that you're following all these things. This is why we're going over all these rules, right? Like Hattie didn't even know he was suspended because he ended up getting a bunch of demerits. And when you get demerits, they just send it in the mail. And most of us, especially nowadays, it's 2020, man. Like we do not check mailboxes. We do not open snail mail, or we leave it for a while. We're like, oh, how long has that been there? And you don't even realize the government's sending you all this stuff. So, okay, when
Yeah,
people
that's
are
why
civilized and educated enough to self-regulate each other, we will need a government anymore. Okay, now we're getting into like politics and things. So I'm gonna get back. This isn't about hating the police. It's just about getting you guys to be responsible and knowing, like, there's 200 pages of rules in here in this book that we're going through. Or not 200, but 120. That's a lot of rules. So that's why we're getting through this and making sure that you guys are responsible of these things, because it lands on you at the end of the day. There's even times where I was driving a bunch of drunk people and we got pulled over, and they're making me do a blow test. They're making me do everything, and they were still trying to give me a fine, and I was sober. But it created hell for me, and I think they ended up impounding my car for like 3 days and stuff, and like all this stuff. So it's tough. We just want to make sure that you understand all those rules when you get behind the wheel. So demerit point schedule. So people are starting to talk about popo and like racism and all this stuff. Like you may get racially profiled as an Indigenous person. It just might happen in your lifetime. And the best thing to do is kind of be calm and like not argue with them. I'm sure Caddy can relate that arguing doesn't always happen, but knowing your rights is good too. Like knowing these rules and these responsibilities and knowing what they can and can't do is really important for your own rights and things like that. So demerit points. Well, now we get to demerit points. What are demerit points? These are points that will go against your license if you're found doing something wrong. So, for example, here, the first example is failing to remain at the scene of a collision. Is it an accident or collision? Collision. It should say collision. In the book, it says failing to remain at the scene of collision. So that's like you got into a car crash, right? And then you sped off, or you say you hit a parked car and then you took off, but somebody saw you, reported your license. That's 7 demerit points. And remember, you're home at school. So remember, we talked about as a GDL driver, as a learner, or even class 5 GDL, you're on your probationary period. You're only allowed 8 demerit points until your license gets suspended. So if you fail to remain at the scene of an accident, that's 7 demerit points. Like that's huge. You're one more infraction from being suspended. So you don't want to get in that. Here's a list of the other ones. Careless driving. So these are all found on page 108. If you go to 108 of your guide, and that's what I was trying to tell Samantha before she went off to go do her test. I don't know if she heard me, but I was recommending that you guys look at these demerit points, because you'll likely get one question, at least one question, maybe even 2 about demerits. So look at all these different ones. There's careless driving, which means like, say you were to pass a truck and it wasn't safe for you to pass, but you punched it and you were speeding and then you almost caused a collision. That could be careless driving. Stunting, that's another one. If you're like doing donuts in the parking lot, that can be some demerit points. Failing to stop for a school bus. Remember we talked about school buses when they have their flashing lights on, and if you don't stop for that school bus, you just keep going past them because you think you can beat them. That's 6 demerit points. Racing, all that kind of stuff. Following too closely. Remember we talked about 2-second rule? If you're within that gap, like if you are following 1 car length, that's too close. If you're following too close to another vehicle, you can get a demerits for that. So all these demerits is penalties, basically. If you're caught doing something against the law, all of these are things where you're breaking the law, like distracted driving. They all come with a fine, like a monetary fee you have to pay to the government, or they'll suspend your license too. If you don't pay those fines, they can restrict your registry services. So next time you go to renew your license or renew your registry, or you want to go up into another class, like you want to go get your class 1 or something, you're in a driver's training program and you have got fines on your file, you're not allowed to do anything until you pay those fines. So that can really stop you from driving, because if you owe a bunch of money, like if you got a bunch of speeding tickets or photo radars, something like that, and you don't pay those, then you can't renew your license. You can't drive. You can't drive a vehicle. So if you were reporting a drunk driver, or you were reported for drunk driving, but you don't get caught, does the inquiry stay with you? Let's say you get pulled over for some traffic stop time later. Does that report still count or no? It can actually. They just recently made changes. I think it was in the past year. And Caddy, let me know if you heard differently. But now I've heard is like, if you were caught drunk driving, say like at a bar, somebody saw you, reported you, then you went home, and then the cops come to your house, and then they arrest you, or they take you in, they make you blow, you can still be fined with drunk driving even if you weren't behind the steering wheel now. Have you heard of that, Caddy? I heard about that. That's actually recently what they've done. So drunk driving is still a serious thing, and they've just recently passed laws to make it easier for police drivers to arrest you or potentially charge you. You would still have to go to court and everything like that, but they can actually place that drunk driving charge on you, even if you're at home, even if you're not caught right behind your steering wheel. So Charmaine, I hope that answered your question. So these demerit points, they can accumulate. They can accumulate on your license, right? So even just breaking 1 or 2 of these, that's 8 demerit points right there, and you got a suspended license. And that's the situation Caddy was in. He accumulated too many of these, and they suspended his license. And then it created this big snowball effect for him, right? So be mindful of all these things. You always need to be following the rules, even when you don't think someone's looking, even when you're like, oh, it's just one time. You got to follow these, because they can have really big implications for you down the road. Me and Caddy both know I've been in a situation where my license was suspended as well, and I had to start from scratch, and I had to do the road exam again, and I still on the GDL program, all that stuff. It took me years to get back on track because of the decisions that I made when I was a lot younger. So you guys are in a prime position where you're brand new, you got a fresh new license. Keep it that way. Keep a clean driving record, because every time you make an infraction or a speeding fine, that goes against your driving record. And then when you go to get a job somewhere, it's on your driving abstract. They record all these things for 5-10 years. It's on your driving abstract, any kind of infraction you make. So just keep it clean. You're in a good position right now where you don't have any previous infractions, so keep those up. That's the best advice I can give you. So here's all these demerits. So I'm not going to go through every single one, but just so you know, they're on page 111, and any one of these could show up on your test. Speeding, you get more demerit points the more over you are the speed limit. So the faster you're going, the more demerits you're going to get. Improper U-turns, traffic lane violations, failing to obey the instruction of a traffic control device, so blowing through a stop sign. There's that one, stunting. So fully licensed drivers, they are actually, so if you're a GDL, there's 8, but a fully licensed driver, somebody who's not on the GDL program, they have a full class 5, or anybody else, like class 1, class 4, anything like that, they can have 15 demerit points before their license gets suspended. So if you get more than 15 demerit points within 2 years, that's when your license gets suspended. So it's not a lifetime. They will kind of reset it, but you have to demonstrate good driving for a minimum of 2 years. And then there is one way. So there is one way to get demerits off your point or added, is through driver's training. If you take a distracted or like a defensive driving course or something like that, then you can gain some demerits back on your license. So but they are really expensive to take driver's training as well. So just be mindful of that. For GDL drivers, from 4 to 7 demerit points, you'll get a warning, right? You'll get a letter in the mail that says, we are concerned about your driving. You need to reconsider your driving practices. I've gotten this letter. So don't get yourself in that situation. And then if you get 8 or more, you get suspended. And then you got to start back from scratch again, right? To get your license back. So number 1, a driver must not surpass the legal blood drug concentration BD cannabis of A, 2 nanograms of THC, 4 nanograms of THC, 5 nanograms of THC, or 10 nanograms of THC. So the answer is C. You cannot exceed that. And that's only if it's just cannabis. If you also add liquor into that, then it's even less. I think it goes down to 2.5. It's half of that. So be mindful. Pick your poison, I guess, or just make accommodations. That's what we always suggest. I think being caddy is like make alternate arrangements. If you do end up drinking or consuming some cannabis, just find an alternate way home and come back for a vehicle, because it's not worth it. Like any amount of cab fare, like 30-40 bucks, is much cheaper than paying thousands and thousands of dollars of fines and getting your car impounded and all that kind of stuff, losing your license, everything. I almost lost my job when I lost my license. But so be very mindful of that. It's just not worth the headache and pain and heartache. Number 2, how many demerit points will be recorded against your license for failing to remain at the scene of collision? If the answer is A, 7 demerit points. Other options were 12, 5, and 4. And that's the most you can get in any single infraction. But say you were in a collision, and then you take off, and then you damage public property, and then you were speeding, and then you were failing to, like, you were resisting arrest, like all of that, like that can build up. You can get multiple demerits in one situation as well. So be mindful of that. Demerits are not just one single event. Like they can add up and snowball and build up over that whole 2-year period, right? Chapter 9, question 3. How many demerit points will be recorded against your license for failing to stop for a peace officer? A, 10 demerit points, B, 4 demerit points, C, 6 demerit points, or 5, D, 5 demerit points. That was the answer. And again, I didn't go through every single one in very, very detail. That's why it's important for you to go back and review that page 110. 110. Just look at those demerits, because they can ask you any one of those. Number 3, how many demerit points will be recorded against your license for following too closely? A, 10, B, 4, C, 5, or D, 3. The answer is 5 demerit points.